welcome to another Roll for Crit review for Visitor in Blackwood Grove from Resident Games. This is an asymmetric puzzle-solving sort of game with an 80s sci-fi Amblin-esque E.T. kind of a theme in which one player is the Visitor, an alien from space who has a force field, and there are cards with objects on them, and everyone's trying to figure out which cards are allowed in the force field and which are not.
Yeah, when the game starts, a visitor is going to look at some starting cards and make a rule, such as things that have circles on them, or maybe something you'd find in a grocery store.
Could be things that have a certain color in them, things that weigh a certain amount. Anything that has to do with the object itself is valid as a rule. Nothing too specific, you know, depending on your group, you could kind of house rule whatever kind of rules you want, but you want people to be able to guess it, hopefully. And the visitor is actually working with another player who takes on the role of the kid.
Yeah, as in the movies you mentioned earlier.
Right.
The kid is trying to help the visitor and try to guess before the government agencies do. The kid will be playing cards face up and face down depending on actually his trust with the visitor, which we'll go to a little later, in order to try to solve the rule before the government agencies. Their agencies are each, there's like, this one's the CIA, but there's also FBI, NSA. They're actually sort of working by themselves. They don't want to, you don't want to share the glory with the other departments.
Yeah, right. And everybody is trying to find the rule just the same way, but they have slightly different turns of going about it. So the CIA basically just says, hey, tell me if this card is in or out. I mean, the government, any of the government agencies do that. Whereas the kid, as you said, they are trying to predict, will this be put into the force? Or I think this will go into the force field, for instance. And the visitor will say yes or no. And if they were right, they may get points, as you said, on this trust board. And the more points they get, the more things that are available to them, the more advantages they have. For instance, the visitor gets to play cards face down, so only the kid knows what they are. Because ultimately, the visitor wants to give away clues only to the kid. It does not want the agencies to win. So it's kind of a two-person team versus a bunch of smaller teams.
Yes, however, the visitor is on a timer. He only has 7 cards. He is able to draw 1 card if the kid is lucky enough to get that much trust. But if he runs out of cards, all the government agencies win.
Yeah,
it's the only way they share.
So the cards that you pick at the beginning of the game as the visitor are important because they're going to determine, you know, what your groupings are, what you think are valid for a rule, and which cards you have that are going to make sense, that you want to give up information about, that you think are too obvious. And there's a lot of different variety of objects. As you can see, there's a yo-yo, there's a bunch of food, there's an easel.
There's a dinosaur, there's the box of the game.
Yeah, there's a pretty wide variety. There's a lot of cards, and even it's not like some games where, oh, you've seen the same cards, you've seen them all. I mean, because depending on the rule, they all have very different purposes and distinct uses. There's a good subset of things in there, I think, that can overlap sometimes or not.
Yeah, I know, because the visitor only gets to show the kid cards face down when he hits a certain trust point. So when you make your hand, you can be like, maybe I want some cards that are very obvious, so once the face down. But in the beginning, to throw off the government agencies, maybe some of these are a bit vague or could be a lot of different things.
Yeah, exactly. And the way you actually try to guess what that rule is, you don't just say it. You don't just say, oh, I think it's red things. You actually, on your turn, flip 4 cards at random and try to predict where you think they're going to go on or off the board, and you just kind of arrange them. Let's just say these are them. In a certain order, you'd say maybe this is on the board, and I think these 3 are off.
Then the visitor, who has these 4 little tokens, is going to do the same thing behind his little shield.
Yeah, so that's why this shield really exists, is for this moment.
We'll say I put it like that, then reveals, and shows that these 2 were out, but these 2 are in. And depending on who was the one making the guess, certain things will happen. If it was one of the government agencies, they actually give trust points to the kid, which makes a big difference, meaning you don't want to just keep guessing randomly.
Yeah, there's a much bigger risk involved, whereas the kid is really just wasting time.
But he can also make a guess in the beginning. He actually has to wait until he hits trust level 2 before you can start that.
So I think they did a good job of balancing those roles. They all play pretty similarly, but nobody feels super overpowered. It is a lot of fun to be the visitor and to come up with those rules. Now they come with some examples which are helpful for when you're getting started, but definitely I think you're going to want to, especially the more you play the game, try to think of your own clever twist, which can be challenging.
Yeah, actually I think that's where one of the biggest problems with this game will come up is, I mean, any game that has this kind of interpretation. I know the one you brought up an example when we were playing this was Mysterium. Is, for example, someone may give you a card and you're just looking at it and you're like, I think that should be in, but... and you have to like decide like that sort of fine line where what makes in, what goes out.
There's definitely
sometimes.
a lot riding on personal judgment calls. So depending on how you interpret the rules and how you think other people will interpret the rules, because as the visitor you can't lie, you can't like cheat and try to mislead anybody. So it can be a tricky line to ride that. The game is super fast because at most there's going to be 8 rounds.
Yeah, and that definitely helps with the interpretation, because if you make a wrong one, it's for 15 minutes, you didn't just ruin 2 hours of gameplay.
So yeah, exactly. And it's fun to just be like, oh, I got an idea for a rule, let me try, or let me see what I can do, how I can get this, let me try a different role. So that's nice. I'm glad you brought up Mysterium, because one of the things that this game definitely has the much similar vibes to Mysterium. What's different about it, I think, is that because it is not cooperative, you don't have the same kinds of conversations that I enjoy in Mysterium from the players saying, oh, what do you think this is? Does that look like this piece to you? Or is this supposed to mean that? Everything is very internalized. So it can be a bit, I think, lonelier of a game in that regard. Most of all the puzzle solving you're doing is in your own head, which some people might like.
You can do, which is really funny, what happens a lot, is because the cards are open, you'll be... the kid might make a guess, and when you put it out, the kid's just like, okay, I have no idea what that is. Like, you just see everyone, when something goes out, like, well, that ruined my idea, and you just see...
there's a lot of that, so you can, you're trying to figure out what are they thinking, what do they know, how do I find out? It's definitely a brain-expanding kind of game.
And one of the small things, but I think it's also really cool for the government side, is once they hit a certain point, they have to start revealing their cards that are usually hidden to the kid, or even to other players. So you may actually like, okay, if I have to reveal one card, what's going to give the least amount away?
So
which does make for a little fun little...
So even early on, you kind of have to decide, do I give the cards I think will give me the most information, or maybe you even want to put in cards that aren't that helpful because just in case they get shown later on. So that's an interesting thing, and you can see the artwork on the cards is super adorable. It's all this very clean, simple designs.
There's the box.
The box itself. There are occasional times when we played where people would say, for instance, hey, is this soap or a rock? And, depending on how your group wants to play, you could define that, or maybe you're on your own, and hopefully you're good at knowing what your teammates are going to figure out or not figure out. So there's some fun to be had there. I really think they did a good job picking these cards up. So if you like these kinds of games, these kinds of fun Dixit-style Mysterium, or Codenames. It's in that genre, but it feels very different in practice than any of those.
Yeah, I mean, also I think if you're that you want the nostalgia. I mean, what Stranger Things rides on, that '80s sort of the kid versus the government. Definitely something worth picking up, because as we said, 15 minutes and you can just switch roles all the time and have fun messing around with different items.
Crits and misses for Visitor in Blackwood Grove. Crits, trying to figure out the visitor's rule, works your brain in an interesting, outside-the-box way, and there's also a push-your-luck element that forces you to think creatively, but make decisions on the fly as to how far you're willing to go, how confident you are in your choices. The different roles are asymmetric, but well-balanced and creative and enjoyable to try different combinations out every time you play.
And because this is a very short game, not taking like around 15 minutes, you can just rotate the roles and have fun with each of them, which makes for a great time.
Artwork on the cards is just simple and vague enough to keep the game interesting, but still has a pleasing and cute style.
And a large variety, allowing you for a lot of different possible rules depending on what cards you get. And for the misses, while the card layout of things that are face up in this bubble is nice, Outside, it's a little weird. Some cards go sort of slightly on the board or outside the board. It can be a little confusing at times.
It comes with little tokens to mark cards for different players, but there is not really a larger board or separated areas, so depending on how big your table is and where people are sitting, it can be a little confusing of how you should lay cards out.
And because this is a competitive game, unlike many of the other games with interpretation of art that are cooperative, you do not talk as much, which can mean it feels a little lonely.
Aw.
As you can see, we see The Visitor as a great, fun party game. It's very light, and because that allows you to switch roles really quickly, and the interpreting, while it can be annoying at times, especially depending on the people in your group, which is almost all games, is a lot of fun to try to guess the rule.
Yeah, it's just such a great premise that, and this is kind of like a classic riddle type thing that I feel like has been around for a while, and to use that as the basis for a game I think is really smart, and that extra theme on top of it, even if you're someone who thinks, oh, I don't like science fiction or something, you can totally ignore that if you want to and just have this kind of brain-busting puzzle game.
But the theme is nice, especially with Stranger Things, riding high on the popular culture chart right now.
Yeah.
It's a perfect fit, I think, in today's gaming world.
Yeah, for sure. That's Visitor in Blackwood Grove. Check it out. It's out there somewhere. It's like the truth.
Mm-hmm. Until then,
work that in.
I'm Will.
I'm Jonathan.
And this has been a Roll for Crit review.
Make sure you click the like and subscribe buttons so you get more board game content from Roll for Crit.
Do it. Do it now.